Live now. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Good evening for those in London. Uh, my name's Nicholas. I'm here with Carlos. We're Anti Conquista. We're gonna do some talking about some recent events in Latin America. Some recent, uh, what's the word you want to call it, Carlos? Kidnappings, arrests.
Detentions, kidnappings,
Right.
yeah,
Right.
illegal detentions of leftist, our Latin American leftist leaders, I'd say.
Right. Right. So we're going to talk a lot about the Alex Saab case, as well as some other cases with FARC members, Colombians all arrested and in U.S. prisons. But before we get to that, how you doing today, Carlos? How's the last
Yo,
week?
good comrade, and I'm sorry, my bad for the lateness. We're a few minutes late because so time has changed here in the UK. When it gets to winter, they change the time. I think an hour. So here we advertise it for 8 p.m. UK time, and his is 10 past 7 p.m. So, but yeah, nah, it's all good. I'm all good. A bit tired and cold.
Yeah, yeah. I didn't know they did that in the UK. I didn't know they sent the times back. I thought that was just a US thing.
Yeah,
Cause
yeah. So it happens in the winter. It starts getting um. What do they do? Anyway, yeah. Because of winter, they change the time a little bit. And then it starts getting late, like really early, like at 4 p.m.
right.
Which is fucking weird, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So we'll make sure to double check the times next time. But yeah, we'll keep doing it. Probably we'll figure out at the same time. It'll probably be an hour after this, or like 4 p.m. Eastern time for future videos, if that works for you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, it could be. Or 7 p.m. is fine as well.
right. All right. Yeah. So we'll figure it out, and we'll let everyone know in later episodes. But let's start. Just get right into the news. Talk about Alex Saab, the recent arrests or kidnappings, whatever you want to call them, of Venezuelan officials. Uh, this in this case, a Venezuelan diplomat who was also a Colombian businessman. Um, and really a kind of arrest that's on like very shaky grounds. It seems like he's already been extradited to the United States. He's gonna basically face trial in Miami, Florida of all places. So it's interesting. I have a lot of questions about it. I'm really curious about like specifically where the U.S. gets its jurisdiction to arrest someone on the grounds that, because if you look at what the U.S. has been claiming, it's been claiming that Saab was laundering money from the Venezuelan CLAP program, which is the food distribution program, which he's been supporting financially. And so, where does the U.S. get its grounds to arrest someone for doing something illegal in another country? Um,
Yeah.
that seems a little bit, like it seems absolutely ridiculous. Like quite literally, the U.S. is acting like the world's police. So I don't know what your thoughts are, Carlos, but you can go ahead.
Yeah, no, and as president as well, is it's not just Saab. We have the case of Simon Trinidad. All the way back in 2004, that was extradited to the US, and in very similar circumstances. Taken, um, put on trial on very dubious and really ultimately bogus charges, really. And it's the same thing they're doing to. I mean, we could go into Simon Trinidad's case a little bit later, but yeah, it's exactly the same thing that they're doing to Alex Saab. Um, they what they're going to do is that they have no proof, no evidence.
Right.
So what they're going to do is make up bogus charges as they've done with other leaders that have been taken before, extradited before. And yeah, it's just uh, there's no respect for the law. Also, to say they've pressured. So what they did with Cape Verde is that they pressured their authorities to um, detain Saab. So I was listening to a conference that was put on by some lawyers. Actually, one of Saab's lawyers and also some African lawyers who who have said that there's political pressure. There was political pressure on um, Cape Verde as um as they have. So I didn't know this, but out of the 39 African countries, there's like 15 African countries on US sanctions. And
Right.
so they use the sanctions on African countries, on global South countries, to pressure them into doing things like what they've done to Alex Saab. So Alex Saab was in Cape Verde, refueling his plane. He's on a he was on a diplomatic mission to secure trade goods for Venezuela in I believe it was places like Iran and Turkey. And also, more importantly, this was last year, June last year, in the height of the pandemic. So Saab is trying, he's sent on this mission to try and get uh, uh, trading deals in food and medicine for the Venezuelan people. And this is when the U.S. pressures Cape Verdean authorities to detain Saab as he's refueling his plane. Completely illegal. The way he's detained was illegal. Apparently, the documents that were provided were supposed to be. It was actually an Interpol for somebody else that was Venezuelan, but nevertheless, they were like, okay, well, it's not him, but we'll take him anyway.
Right.
So yeah, it's completely illegal move. No respect for international law. Alex Saab has been tortured. He wasn't a doctor flew in from the UK to try and treat him as he was having some health issues, and they didn't allow the doctor to go in. They didn't allow his lawyers. Imagine his lawyers weren't allowed to go in and visit him at certain points. I'm not quite sure if they did eventually. I assume they were able to have some contact with him. But anyway, just a whole list of irregularities when it comes to the case, and it's not because Alex Saab is a dangerous criminal that they're doing this to him. It's because Alex Saab was in effect, a representative of the Venezuelan government, and also what they're trying to do really is um, what they found out, what they're trying to do to Saab is pressure him into criminalizing Maduro and other Venezuelan officials who they're after. Um, so yeah,
Yeah,
that's
and so I'll add a little bit more to those facts because recently, or just some things that I've been researching because I've been trying to really look into what is the like what claims are being made against Saab. And it's interesting because that other name, when you talk about the Interpol warrant, and it changed very quickly to another name. The claim made here in the U.S. courts has the name of the other Venezuelan. I forget the guy's name, but he's another. I think he's another businessman. And it's interesting because they lump him and Saab together, but they're really going after this other guy, including and the claims I've seen includes seizing their assets, whatever personal goods they had on them, um, as well as some other things. But in terms of Cape Verde, I found it interesting that I'm in this group, a solidarity group with basically members from Barbados, from the Venezuelan embassy in Barbados, and they're working with trying to promote Alex Saab, free Alex Saab material. And one of the things that they mentioned was that Cape Verde actually was sort of, like Carlos said, was pressured into this, but they recently elected a more progressive president who was less focused on U.S. Relations than the previous president. But right before the previous president was to step down from office, and this new progressive one, who was most likely going to pardon Alex Saab, took the oath. The former one kind of fast tracked Alex Saab's extradition to the U.S. before. So they kind of had this. This was uh, I think he's been arrested for over a year now. He was arrested back in 2020.
Mhm.
So this was kind of something that was in the works. They had this plan. They had this set up very clearly. And like you said, a lot of the claims that are being made are very fraudulent or they're on very shaky grounds where the way I see it is I don't see how this case is going to stand in U.S. trial unless they like falsify a lot of evidence, but it seems more so as almost like a threat or a power move to sort of intimidate Venezuela and anyone who allies with them.
Right, right. And you're right. I recently wrote an article for the for in a in an outlet here in the UK called the Tribune, and I was talking about the fact that so there's various charges on him. One of them is corruption and somehow stealing or funneling money from uh, supposedly the Venezuelan government's money into his own bank accounts and stuff. There was the Swiss banks opened up an investigation into Saab's money in a bank account that he has, found no evidence of of this supposed corruption, and it was closed. So as you're saying, they don't need any evidence really.
Right.
Um, this is a political move. This isn't really about what Alex Saab has actually done. It's really what Alex Saab represents and what he could give up. And unfortunately, and it looks for at least up until now, it looks like Saab is not going to give anything up. He's sticking by, defending the Venezuelan process. But it can take somebody. It can take a toll. Like if you're being pressured, if you're being tortured, if you're in solitary confinement, or you might, just like they do in Guantanamo Bay, they might torture him into saying something that is actually not true, which is what it looks like they're trying to do. They're trying to get Saab to incriminate Maduro and other Venezuelan officials, with the view of doing something similar to them too.
Right. And so in the poster that we put up for this advertising this, we had two other individuals I feel like that are a lot less known and a lot
Yeah.
less talked about. One of them is Simon Trinidad, and what was the other one's name?
Rodrigo Grande.
Grande. See, so
Yeah.
do you want to go into like a little bit of detail bio who these individuals are, how they were arrested, what they have to do with Alex Saab and the connection?
Yeah, so Simon Trinidad, to me, like a very important Colombian or Latin American leftist leader, communist leader, who he has a very interesting history. He comes from a middle class, quite wealthy family in Colombia's coastal region. Went to quite good schools, middle class schools, both in Valledupar, which is a small city in the Colombian coast, and in Bogota, the capital city. So this is a guy who is quite clever. He also studied uh, um, what did he study? Something to do with finance and banking at university. He also went to Harvard. So this is quite a clever and middle class to upper class Colombian who, when he finishes his studies, goes into works for a bank in Valledupar in his city. And then after a while, also picks up a job at a local university. So he's part-time bank manager, part-time university lecturer. And while he's at university, he, uh, at Colombian University, I guess depending on what university you go to, you always have some kind of progressives there, progressive circles reading Marxism and communism and socialism and so on. And particularly in Colombia, where there's a lot of oppression, there's a lot of poverty, a lot of university lectures and so on are quite radical. So Simon Trinidad, gets involved in this kind of circle of Marxists, and the contradiction, he becomes this Marxist banker, part-time bank manager. Eventually, him and his friends at the university create a party, a quite radical party called Los Independientes, the Marxist-Leninist party. which was then tied to La Unión Patriótica, which was the party that was created by the FARC in conjunction and coalition with the FARC and other more radical sectors of the left in Colombia in the 1980s. And the Unión Patriótica was supposed to be the party that came out of the peace process that didn't really work out in the early 1980s with the FARC. But the party was created and it was supposed to, and it was doing big things, and it was winning a lot of local elections, and you could see them possibly taking the presidential elections, which the Colombian elites did not allow to happen. And so there was a genocide committed against the party. That's important because Simon Trinidad's people, Simon Trinidad and his friends, through this Partido Independiente, or Los Independientes, as they call themselves, were tied to La Unión Patriótica. And so his friends began to get killed. His friends began to have to migrate out of the country and seeking refuge in other countries and so on. And Simon Trinidad decides actually he doesn't want to leave the country. So what he decides to do instead is to quit his job at the university and as a bank manager. He stole 30 million pesos from the bank he was working at and joined the FARC as one of their leaders. And he becomes an important leader in the FARC, an educator really. He's not really part of the military personnel of the FARC per se. He was more of the propaganda side of things, education side of things, and also a negotiator, a peace negotiator was one of his main roles. The country, so just to show that this, we're not really talking about a criminal. We're not talking about. I'm not saying guerrillas are criminals, but I'm saying we're not even talking about a guy who's who was in the field, actually in the war. This is a guy that was really one of the intellectuals of the movement.
Right.
He goes to Ecuador, Quito, the capital city of Ecuador, in 2004 to negotiate some the interchange of hostages. So some of the hostages that the FARC had, they wanted to interchange them with some of the prisoners that the Colombian state had, some FARC prisoners. While he was there trying to do those negotiations with the UN, by the way, the Ecuadorian authorities arrest him and extradite him to Colombia, where the Supreme Court. So they arrest him on charges of rebellion, of rebellion, and anyway, criminal activities. He gets to Colombia, extradited from Ecuador, and the Supreme Court in Colombia says, actually, you're wanted in the US on drug trade charges.
So he was arrested in the U.S. for drug trafficking, is what they claim.
So they were saying that he was involved in the drug trade, and because of that, the U.S. wanted him for extradition. So Colombia has some kind of I don't know if they do have it still. They have a deal with the U.S. that anybody who's in the drug trade, particularly in if you're considered to be like a top drug trader in Colombia, you can be extradited to the U.S. And so they use this extradition, this justification as him being a supposed drug dealer or narcotics trader to extradite him to the U.S. on charges of a drug trade, when in reality there's absolutely no proof. So they go to trial. They go to trial again, like Saab in Florida, and they have 3 trials against him, and all 3 trials you have a hung jury on. In fact, the last trial, the jury has said there's no evidence that this guy's involved in the drug trade. Yeah. And so what they do pin on him is a supposed hostage taken, and it was because of this case of 3 U.S. Military contractors, really is what they were, that were operating in Colombia, basically doing spying on the insurgents, on the guerrilla fighters. And so they claim that Simon Trinidad was directly involved in taking these hostages, these military, there's U.S. Contractors that were in Colombia spying on the FARC. That did happen. They were taken hostage, but what didn't happen is that Simon Trinidad had nothing to do with it. He wasn't in the area. He wasn't directly involved in that operation. So basically, in the legality of it, again, like in Alex Saab's case, they have no they have nothing on Simon Trinidad. They had nothing on him in terms of the drug trade, and they had nothing on him in terms of the hostages that were taken. Um, and so subsequently, what the U.S. has done is that um, because they really don't know who took these hostages, these U.S. hostages. What they've done, especially because of Simon Trinidad's case, to justify it, they're saying the culprit is the whole of the organizations of the FARC.
Right.
So that's how they're justifying
He's
his detention, and
yeah.
he was given 60 years
For
in
that. Yeah.
prison in solitary confinement.
Right.
So Simon Trinidad has been in prison since 2004 in solitary confinement, with very little support from there is a campaign for Simon Trinidad in the US. I forget what it's called, but it's worthwhile looking into, because this is one of our leaders. This is a guy who uh, turned his back on wealth. What you could call a class traitor. Um, and joined a revolutionary organization to try and change and transform Colombian society. And he's effectively been kidnapped by the U.S. With with very little support from anyone, really.
Right.
It's fucking sad.
Well, it's interesting too, because a lot of those laws are, you can see how the laws are specifically made for cases like his, almost.
Right.
uh, the pinning of, or the extradition treaty around drug dealers, or anyone involved with drug trafficking. It makes sense to me now. I didn't know that, but it makes sense to me now why you have a lot of this propaganda coming out where it's like everyone who's in the ELN or everyone who's in the FARC is affiliated with the drug trade. Well, if
Right.
you say that, then it's going to be easier to ship them out to the
Right.
U.S. or any other country whose prisons are going to be not only more secure, but most likely the population is also not going to know who the hell any of these people are. So you're not going to get as much support as you would if you were in Colombia and you had him in prison there. Um,
Right.
and
And
so,
and there's and
yeah,
there's other ways there's other like legal stuff that they do. Like, for example, so even though Simon Trinidad wasn't directly involved in the case of the free hostages, the free U.S. hostages that were taken, he wasn't directly involved. But what they do is that they kind of change the facts a little bit. So at first, they were saying that these free hostages were contractors that were looking into they were surveying the plantations, the drug trade plantations. And then it turns out that actually they were more directly involved in the conflict because they were spying on the insurgents. So effectively, they were um, legit military targets. If you're in a war and you're getting involved in the conflict, you're a legit military target.
right,
Like, so, so they change the facts. They like to change the facts. So even if Simon Trinidad was involved, which he wasn't, but even if he was involved in the taking of these hostages in international law, they would be this is considered a war situation. You
right,
can't, he's not just taking civilian hostages as he was tried for.
right. And you have rights to self defense essentially in cases like that. It
Right,
reminds me a lot of the case with Puerto Rico, where according to the UN, colonized nations have a right to take up arms and fight against uh, whoever the colonizer is. In that case, it's like a war situation. You have the right to
right,
defend yourself. What's also interesting to me, though, about that point is that they use almost a law that's really popular here in the United States that usually is really used in poor neighborhoods, black and brown neighborhoods, to arrest groups of people. So, for
hmm
example, if you're affiliated with a gang, even if you haven't been affiliated with the gang in decades, and that gang commits a crime, you can be arrested for that crime and charged as if you committed the crime, which is what
Right.
happened exactly here. And it's interesting that it just interested me the overlap between how they oppress colonized peoples within this country, and then how they do the same to populations in the global South,
Right.
who aren't even who don't even live in this country, and yet they could still apply those laws unjustly to each. Um, so it's I think his case, like you said, I think his case is important because it not only connects to Alex Saab's case, and it connects to our our beliefs in struggling for socialism, and our beliefs in struggling as revolutionaries and supporting these movements, but also it exposes how a lot of these a lot of the oppression and the racism and the injustice that occurs in these systems is not just is not limited just here in the United States. It also, it affects people internationally. It affects revolutionaries internationally. It affects activists, people who actually care to try to make a change. It affects everyone equally, and this is one of the reasons why we oppose a lot of these, why we oppose some of these laws, and why we criticize them.
Yeah, and it's a way. It's non. Really, what it is non-military counterinsurgency.
Right.
And it puts people off in the more radical sectors of our society that could play a part in the transformation of our countries. It puts people off from doing so. It's a very effective way to interfere in our local and our national politics of our homelands. Because imagine, like, if you could be taken extradited to the US and put in a um, in a cell in solitary confinement for 60 years, which is what Simon Trinidad is facing. 60 years of solitary confinement, simply for standing up for your people, simply for going to war with and it's the right of every nation to. I think it's a right in the U.S. Is it not in the Constitution that it says that, if your government is oppressing you, you have the right to rebel against it?
Yep.
And it's the same right that Simon Trinidad and the rest of Colombian revolutionaries, Latin American revolutionaries have to defend themselves and go to war against a government that's oppressing you, that's killing you, that's making you live in poverty, and so on. So it's really sad to see somebody like Simon Trinidad really maybe, I don't know, us as Anticonquista and our sister organization Red Condor, who more directly linked to the struggle in Colombia, is really something that we do need to pay attention to. One of our leaders basically rotting in a U.S. prison is fucking horrendous.
And it doesn't even touch on too the fact that solitary confinement itself is a form of torture.
Of course,
Um,
yeah.
and it often is. It's been recognized now through studies about just how awful and degrading it is on people mentally, emotionally, socially. Um, and that's one of the reasons why it's being used in cases like these, because they
Right.
know how detrimental and how damaging the effects can be. But did you want to also talk about go over Rodrigo Grande or?
Yeah, so just quickly, and just to say, Simon Trinidad and Alex Saab, these are like the more extreme cases of and also the successful cases where the US managed to actually extradite or kidnap, whatever you want to call it, these leaders. But there's also other cases, and particularly recently, we know that Rodrigo Grande, which is the leader of, again, the FARC, which is now the legal party, a legal party in Colombia called Comunes. Very similar circumstances. He was invited by the Partido del Trabajo from Mexico to go and give a seminar on Colombia's peace process. He leaves Colombia, gets to Mexico, is in the airport going through immigration, and they detain him and they don't tell him why. And he's detained for hours. And so no lawyer present, They don't let him speak to anybody. It turns out that there was a Interpol. There was what do they call it? A red. Anyway,
Like a,
whatever.
yeah, it's like a warrant basically, but like a red alert or something.
Red alert, Interpol warrant, and so what they were trying to do, and Colombia's government say that they had nothing to do with it. But what they were trying to do was that they were trying to pin a crime that was committed in Paraguay in 2004. They were trying to pin it on him, even though again the evidence for this is completely it's ridiculous. Like what they anyway. Let me explain the situation. So in Paraguay in 2004, the daughter of an ex-president was kidnapped by a rebel group to try and get ransom from her family. In the end, it didn't work out. They killed her, and yeah. So this is, you know, completely devastating for especially for the Paraguayan elites. You know, one of their own people being, not that we not that we support that kind of action, but to the elites, this was like, how could they do this to one of our people? And it was a big thing. They decided that the rebel group in Paraguay, there was no way they could have organized this all by themselves, and they must have had support from the FARC in Colombia, and particularly the leaders of the FARC, and particularly this guy Rodrigo Grande. And that's basically their justification. Their supposed proof is that he was emailing them. They show no proof that this email that they have is connected to Rodrigo Grande. Again, like it's just ridiculous charges, ridiculous evidence, and really what they're trying to do. The Paraguayan elites, because the Paraguayan elites were looking for him with the Colombian elite. Basically working together in a conspiracy to take out leftist leaders all over the continent.
Right.
And particularly there's Rodrigo Grande, who's a really, quite an ideologue for the FARC or for the Communist Party today. And somebody who I guess has some influence. Comunist is a legal party in Colombia now. He has some public appeal. He can talk to the public and try to convince them in terms of disseminating more radical ideas in our community. And this is dangerous for everyone. This is dangerous. I mean, not for everyone, for the elites, and that's why they persecute these radical leftists. And really, if we go down to the bottom of communist leaders, yeah.
All right, and again, it's interesting too to see how all these stories are connected, and we can go even further, and we can, these are three political prisoners in the U.S. who just happen to be from Colombia, but we can go even further and go down the list of Black, Puerto Rican,
Right.
Indigenous, all political prisoners here in the United States, all oftentimes charged with the same things, not necessarily something that they did, but something that maybe they might be partially distantly affiliated with in some way or another. And so it's interesting because, again, this really doesn't get talked about. Like these political prisoners in particular really don't get discussed or mentioned. Alex Saab being, I guess, an exception, a rare exception, being that his name is so well known previous, I guess, to this arrest, that he has kind of sort of a bigger force behind him, which is a good thing. But I think
and also because he has the Venezuelan government. He actually has the government, the Venezuelan government, and also friendly governments all over the world,
like the
who are willing to speak out for him. Whereas insurgent leaders like Simon Trinidad and Grande, won't enjoy the same kind of support. But can I just clarify that actually Rodrigo Grande, the more recent case, he was able to go back to Colombia, and only because they fucked up the warrant. There was some kind of mistake that they made on the warrant, and they weren't able to correct it in time, and so Granda was able to get on a plane back to Colombia to avoid being extradited to the U.S. or to Paraguay. So he was lucky, but this is what they're doing. They're trying to they're really trying to this is the new way of taking out our leaders. You don't have to kill them, just throw some bogus charges on them and extradite them to the US or to countries willing to take them and shut them up. Really, that's what it
Right.
was. What
Exactly. And what does that say too about the U.S. Like any sort of ideas of equality in the U.S. or like justice in the U.S. I've heard people say things like the U.S. justice system is one of the best justice systems, but it's literally a justice system that's being used to almost intentionally indict and find guilty, intentionally imprison people who may not have actually been guilty of anything that they of anything wrong. Um, and so that's really what it's kind of the system what we're dealing with. Not only that, but the United States uh, actually acting like the world's police.
right.
Again, it's crazy. What the craziest thing to me about this is that we're talking about nations that have their own sovereignty. Mexico, Colombia, Ecuador, these countries have their own government. They have their own democracies. They have their own laws and constitutions. And yet, despite all of that, the United States can somehow find ways to take citizens, not even of their own country, but of these other countries, and bring them back to the United States to essentially sentence them almost to death. I mean, 60 years in prison that's essentially a death sentence. That is a death sentence. Um,
And it's sad, and we've said it before, and it's not to say that we is amazing. What is great? I'm gonna say amazing. It's great what Julian Assange did in terms of exposing some of the shit that went on. Also take into account that Julian Assange's politics aren't fucking great. Like, let's be fucking honest
he,
about that.
he worked with the State
Um,
Department, the U.S. State Department. I don't think people
yeah,
talk.
and also like he was like willing to throw anybody under the bus. Our socialist leaders
Right.
and supposedly expose them with like bullshit documents that he took out as well, out of context and all of that. So you know I'm not saying, again, like, great, we should actually be defending um Julian Assange in terms of he really did nothing wrong. Like, what he did is good for freedom of information. Like, the public need to know what these governments and have been doing, and by extension hold them accountable. Same thing with Chelsea Manning and other Snowden. Like, these are people who are like considered heroes and so on. But what about our people, our leaders? Simon Trinidad, 60 years solitary confinement. And where's the campaign? Like, where's the campaign for him? And Simon Trinidad, we're not just talking about a liberal, here and there, like Julian Assange with his politics. No, we're talking about a communist leader who
Mhm.
put his life on the line to try and free his people, to try and transform his country and transform the region. Um,
Right.
he deserves he deserves our support.
Right. Yeah. No, that's a good point. It's true because a lot of these leaders, and we've talked about this before in the past, or a lot of these leaders who get a lot of the media attention, uh, oftentimes white, uh, usually male, usually from some European country, and it's almost the exact same kind of cookie cutout. And their politics, like you said, aren't really super radical. They're for free speech, but usually when it comes to more radical political prisoners, uh, like you said, Simon Trinidad, you could go Leonard Peltier, you can go Mumia Abu Jamal, um, all kinds of individuals from Latin America, from the African diaspora, who are in prison right now, who are very radical, who have done far better work, and who are have far smaller campaigns for them. And I think it's important that we always keep bringing that up and keep talking about that because that's still until it catches on, right? Until it catches on, we can't stop talking about all these political prisoners.
Every time we talk about Assange as Latin Americans, every time we talk about Assange, we have to talk about
Exactly.
Simon Trinidad. We have to talk about Saab and Peltier and so on.
Hmm.
Because it's ridiculous. Like, these are our people rotting in a U.S. prison in solitary confinement is devastating, and is demoralizing for everybody involved. Like, these are
Absolutely.
revolutionaries uh, who are really being assassinated.
Right.
Well, yeah, taken out. They're being taken out of the game, and nobody's saying shit.
Right. Absolutely. So I don't have any more for that topic. Do you have anything else to say? Any final comments before we move on to the headlines?
A final comments is to say, particularly on Simon Trinidad and Alex Saab, like we need to pay attention to that and do something about it. I don't know if we could have like a fundraiser for them. Well, maybe Alex Saab doesn't really need a fundraiser, but maybe Simon Trinidad. Um, Simon Trinidad, we maybe we could have some kind of fundraiser for him. And yeah, we just need to show our active support to these people who are detained. Our people who are detained. I think Nick has frozen. I'm not sure if you guys can hear me. Let me see. Could people comment if they can hear me? And I'll continue while we wait for Nick. Let's see. Okay, it looks like it's just me for now. All right, bear with me while I get some notes up for the next part of the show, which is what we usually do is just go around the headlines in Latin America at the moment. So bear with me while I get my notes up. And I'm sure Nick will be coming back on soon. All right, let's see. Okay, comrades, bear with me a sec. Bear with me a sec while we get Nick back on to do the rest of the show. Okay, comrades, if you're just joining us, we're just waiting a little while comrade Nick comes back on. Okay, Nick says he's coming back on very soon. So yeah, we're just waiting for Nick to come back on to do the next part of the show. The first part of the show was us talking about particularly three of our leaders, Latin American leaders who have been detained by the US and we would say illegally Actually, if you look into the details of those cases, people like Alex Saab, Rodrigo Grande, and Simon Trinidad, three Latin American leftist leaders, two of them communists actually. Alex Saab is really a Colombian-born businessman, but who decided because of his ideals. We're not saying that Alex Saab is necessarily a die-hard revolutionary or leftist. He was a businessman, and he was getting a cut from the deals he was making. But importantly, this is a guy who was trying to help the Venezuelan socialist government in trade deals to try and avoid or to try and navigate around the U.S. blockade or the U.S. sanctions against Venezuela last year in the middle of a pandemic. And he was arrested in Cape Verde. Simon Trinidad, insurgent guerrilla fighter who was extradited from Ecuador to Colombia and then from Colombia to the US on bogus charges. And more recently, Rodrigo Grande, about a week ago, maybe 5 days ago, Rodrigo Grande, who's a socialist leader in Colombia at the moment, they had an Interpol warrant on him, and luckily it didn't go through. It wasn't. He flew out to Colombia to Mexico, and they messed up the warrant, and so he was able to go back to Colombia. But the point is, this is the one of the new strategies from the imperialist north to take out our leaders is exactly that, to try and oh, hey Nick. So yeah, I was just giving a quick rundown of what we had said so far before going into the next section. Yeah.
All right, cool. Yeah, that was my bad. My computer, I don't know why, shut down. But so we can move on to the headlines whenever you're ready.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So we'll start with our first headline, starting with the Mexico and Central American region. Starting with Mexico, this is from The Hill. There are more than 150 boys and girls. This is a quote from the article. Specifically, there are more than 150 boys and girls who can't walk anymore. There are pregnant women with sores on their feet who can't continue walking. We estimate there are 90 women in critical state. So basically, there are major health concerns that are going on right now about this migrant caravan that's coming up from Central America, going through Mexico and into the United States. There's the health concerns, as I stated before. A lot of the children can no longer walk. A lot of the women are also having difficulty, particularly pregnant women, having difficulty moving. There's approximately thousands of people within this caravan. And it's interesting because Mexico has offered many. Mexico basically made an offer to women and children to give them humanitarian visas to stay for employment or whatever they may need. It has not done the same for most men, but it's trying to, Mexico is trying to stem or stop the flow of migrants from Mexico, from Central America into the United States. And so they're doing this visa program to try to do that. Any thoughts on that, Carlos?
Again, we, as we like to do at Anticonquista, is go to the roots of it, and just kind of delving deeper into why do our people have to migrate from our countries and go through. Can you imagine the conditions must be so bad that people are willing to go through these type of situations to try and get to the US? And yeah, it's always important to always point out that that really the cause, the root problem of our people having to migrate is the capitalist imperialist system, and at the bottom of it all is always the US, who because of their meddling in our political, economic, social affairs, they destabilize our countries in their interest, and so them going, our people arriving at the US is really is the US's fault.
Right.
So they shouldn't complain. They shouldn't be shocked, or they shouldn't complain that you know that these
Right.
migrants are ending up there.
Right, and we've also heard a lot of reports too of a lot more Haitian migrants now on the border, particularly stuck in Tijuana, stuck in Mexico. A lot of that again has to do with, like Carlos said, U.S. imperialism, coupled with natural disasters, which are only made worse by the response by the international community, which is oftentimes to steal money or to do a half-assed job in trying to fix the country. But that's going on recently in Mexico with the migrant caravan. Moving on to Guatemala, Guatemalans in El Estor have been fighting against a nickel mine, which many argue is polluting the local fishing supply. The community is made up of mostly Mayan people, and the government has responded by declaring a state of siege. After a recent peaceful protest was repressed by security forces, they fired tear gas, and they said that 4 officers were injured. A state of siege in Guatemala is basically the same as martial law, with curfews have been enacted and such. The nickel company that is working on the mine is under the this company called the Guatemala Nickel Company, but they are a subsidiary company of the Swiss Solway Investment Group. So ultimately, this is like a Swiss um, corporation that owns this mining company who's using the government to repress these indigenous communities.
Yeah, and again, this particular kind of news story um, shows the hypocrisy of the West. They like to, especially Europeans, like to appear to be at the forefront of climate change and fighting environmental injustice and humanitarian injustice. Uh, but they're fucking funding it and they're profiting from it.
Right.
And some of them, okay, fair enough. Like some of them aren't aware that their companies, their national companies are doing this, but you need to fucking get aware of what's going on.
Yeah.
You need to be aware of where the wealth of your country is coming from,
Right.
and how by extension how that um, is messing up the environment, and also impeding people's sovereignty.
And like you said too, it's crazy because recently too they had the G20 climate summit, which I think is somewhere in Europe. So at the same
Yeah,
time that they're having that meeting, these corporations are destroying indigenous communities. In this case specifically, I believe they were claiming that the company was polluting, like I said, they were polluting the local fishing supply, and the majority of the indigenous folks like they make their money off of fishing. So you're literally, quite literally, destroying the community, absolutely, economically and socially, etc. Um, but then they're going to have these meetings in Europe about how they're the forefront of climate change.
they're
Exactly.
the forefront of nothing. They're hypocrites as well. Just to give a quick example as well, just as the conference is coming up, just as this is coming up, the UK government announces that they're going to cut taxes on national flights within the UK. So from England to Scotland to Wales and Ireland, making it cheaper for people here to fly. The worst kind of fuels that you could be putting out there, and they're gonna make it cheaper, and they're going to, obviously, this is gonna have a devastating effect on the environment. But who's policing them?
Right.
Where are the environmentalists when it comes to the UK? There's just hypocrisy, Western hypocrisy.
Right. Right. So now going on to our next headline, real quick before I go on to the next headline, just want to give a shout out to everyone who's stuck with us. We're about an hour in. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for watching with us, both the first half and the second half. But moving on now, we're going to Nicaragua, and this is interesting. We've been talking about Nicaragua a lot in the show for the past maybe like I don't know how long, months, 2 months now.
Yeah.
Um, and this is a continuing on that same topic of Nicaragua and its elections. So the U.S. is preparing a new wave of sanctions against Nicaragua over their elections on November 7th. The U.S. continues to call the elections a sham and fraudulent. They're looking for ways to further punish Nicaragua and Ortega. One idea that they recently proposed, because they're really struggling on how to punish Nicaragua at this point. And one thing that they proposed was they were going to remove Nicaragua from this free trade deal called CAFTA DR, which is just between Central America, the United States, and the Dominican Republic. And it really gives a lot. From what I read, it really gives a lot of benefits to Central American nations, lowering the taxes on their exports. So they're threatening to remove Nicaragua from the deal, which would be pretty detrimental to their economy. Your thoughts? And, well, real quick before I go to you, Carlos, I want to read some quotes from the article because I think these quotes really they stood out to me. And how this was a Reuters article, so how the U.S. media is portraying this. So they say specifically here, U.S. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken said in a statement last week that Ortega, who is seeking a fourth term, and his wife, Vice President Rosario Murillo, were preparing a sham election devoid of credibility by silencing and arresting opponents. One U.S. government source said further sanctions were in the works after the election, and the State Department official also signaled such a move was likely. U.S. officials warned that Nicaragua's membership in the CAFTA regional trade agreement gives preferential treatment to Central American exports to the United States could be in jeopardy if Ortega rigs the election in his favor. And then they say that about half of Nicaragua's exports go to the United States. So if they do get removed, that's where they would really get hurt.
Right, yeah, and it's comparable to what they're doing to Venezuela, what they've been doing to Venezuela for a while now, and actually what they've been doing in Nicaragua for a while, because it's very similar actually. I know the protests. When were the protests in Nicaragua? 2017, 18? I can't remember.
Oh yeah, I want to say 2018, but I'm not
Was it
positive.
2018? Something like that. And it was very similar to what happened in Venezuela. And it's not to say again, like it's fair, like people anywhere, even in the socialist countries that we support or that we have critical support for, the people there should be able to protest. Yeah, of course. We yeah, we agree. But what was been going on and what they did in Nicaragua in 2018 or 17, whenever it was, um, is imperialist meddling. It's inorganic. It's the US and Europe sending, millions to right wing and extreme right wing groups to destabilize the country, to undo the policies of progressive governments, and to really ultimately overthrow progressive governments, or socialist leaning governments. And yeah, it's the same thing that they're doing to Venezuela is what they're doing now. Also important to mention the human rights organizations, Western human rights organizations. WOLA. I have beef with WOLA. What do they stand for? The Washington Office for Latin America.
Yeah, something like something like that.
Something like that. I really don't like them. I really hate them. They they're just imperialist tools. I don't know whether they know it or not. But as Omali Yeshitela, the great African American revolutionary, says, it's convenient ignorance. If they aren't aware that they're imperialist tools, then it's convenient ignorance. Because as Westerners, you should become aware. That's your duty. Become aware of how your country or how you particularly are being used in this imperialist war against our people. And Wola, the journalists, the activists, and the writers, and the project managers at Wola are being used in this imperialist war,
Right,
and they do it really well. They what they really do is garner support for the U.S. State Department and their war against places like Nicaragua, like Venezuela. Let the people be. If the people of Venezuela want to get rid of the government that they have, let them be. Stop meddling in their affairs. They'll do it themselves if it's what they want. Um, but yeah, yeah,
right.
we
No,
also have to be very careful with these so-called humanitarians who do propaganda work. Is what they do,
right.
propaganda work for
That's what I was
the
gonna
US.
say. We have so right now what we're gonna see is an influx, and when we get to the next story about Cuba too, I'll mention it again. but there's going to be an influx of NGOs, professors, academics,
Right.
journalists, reporters, all these individuals who, and these aren't going to be like conservative, far right wing individuals. These are going to be like progressives and liberals who are all going to be coming out saying, this group is oppressed in Nicaragua, and this group is oppressed, and these individuals are being not tolerated, or whatever it might be, or they're losing their rights, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so, we have to be very cautious about, especially like you mentioned, these. Is WOLA a government institution, or is it NGO?
It's an NGO.
Right. Right. There's going to be a lot of these NGOs that are going to be in these already in these nations, are already getting reports from probably right wing paramilitary groups who are going to be
Right.
pushing out false information, and it's going to be spread like wild. It's going to spread like wildfire. And
It's what they've been doing to Nicaragua
right.
with the political prisoners, so-called political prisoners. And if you go down to the bottom of it, if you look into who these people are, who the Nicaraguan government has been arresting, are these leaders who have been
Right.
receiving funds from the US and from private companies and corporations, um, and 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 doing illegal shit in the country, illegal electoral stuff in the country. So but then the humanitarians will come and be like, oh, these are political prisoners and they're being tortured and so on. No, these are dangerous individuals who are destabilizing the country. Like,
Right. Exactly.
yeah.
Exactly, and we'll probably talk about it again as the elections get closer. The elections are on November 7th, so keep an eye out that for Nicaragua. But moving on to Cuba and the Caribbean. So starting with Cuba, the National Assembly of People's Power had its ninth legislature's seventh ordinary session. It's a mouthful. Many high-ranking Cuban officials spoke during the meeting. Very powerful criticisms were made against the current U.S. policy against Cuba, as well as accusations of U.S. meddling. At the end of the session, a statement was put out denouncing U.S. subversive acts against Cuba. Here's a quote from this. This is an article from Granma, but this I think is a really powerful quote. The statement notes that the U.S. government organizes, instigates, facilitates, finances, encourages, and tolerates aggression and terrorist activities against Cuba from its own territory, making use of unscrupulous individuals and groups promoted and supported by Congress members and other authorities of that country, while condemning the call for unconstitutional demonstrations, acts of vandalism, and other criminal behavior, including assassinations, with the objective of overthrowing the Cuban government, including the option of a U.S. military intervention. Given this reality, the National Assembly reiterated its support for the revolutionary government's decision in the exercise of sovereignty and the law to confront and prevent these aggressions meant to undermine our independence and destroy the constitutional order and socialism in Cuba. I thought that was a really powerful statement, a really good statement. And I think we also have to keep in context that the Cuban, so in Granma, and according to the Cuban government for the past month, they have known about there's going to be protests next month in November, around November 15th. Particularly, it's being led by this individual named Junier Garcia. He's a young guy, young Cuban guy. I think he's part of some sort of environmental rights group, but I'm not entirely sure. The group's called Archipelago, and he the government has known about his plans to protest. He's pretty well connected to the United States and some ambassadors and such. And I believe the group he's with right now might be NED funded, but I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But they know about this. And November 15th is an important date because that is also the date that the Cuban government plans to open up the country back
Yeah.
to foreigners. So this is interesting. The statement was powerful, given the context that it was said in. I think that's also important. But what are your thoughts, Carlos?
Yeah, I think we're starting to see that the Cuban government and actually all progressive governments in Latin America are starting to see are starting to crack down on these different ways that the U.S. empire is attempting to attack them and really would ultimately overthrow them. That's what they're looking for, and is what they're looking for in Venezuela, in Cuba too. And so we have this saying in the left, the combination of all forms of struggle. But actually, the capitalists have developed their combination of all forms of struggle. They'll invade you militarily if they can, but if they can't, they will invade you in other ways. In Cuba, They can't invade them militarily because the people won't have it. But this is their technique now. They can invade you via social media. They can invade you via these so-called independent um, uh, media outlets, and they can invade you with environmentalists, NGOs, humanitarians, and so on. And that's what they're doing in Cuba.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's gonna look for us here in the West. We have to be prepared to see things for what they really are, and see through the bullshit. Because it's gonna look to us, it's gonna be portrayed to us like Cuba is breaking humanitarian law or international humanitarian uh, human rights laws. But really, what we're going to be seeing is the Cuban government hopefully cracking down on these U.S. Imperialist tools, puppets who are there really to destabilize. These are dangerous, again, dangerous individuals
Hmm.
who have a lot of power, who are well funded, and who have an influence that we don't want in the region.
Hmm.
Um,
And
so they're in their right. They're in their right to to come down on them hard.
right, right, yeah, and you're absolutely right that they have a lot of influence. Like Cubans say, they have members of Congress, U.S.
Right.
Congress, who support them and advocate for them, and meet with them. And it's amazing that the right wing Cubans here in the United States have probably up there with the Israel lobby, have probably one of the strongest lobbies in U.S. politics and one of the strongest voices, despite
Right.
being such a small minority. But another story coming out of Cuba, a little bit more on the positive side. So 100%, everyone who is eligible for a vaccine in Cuba has gotten at least the first dose of the vaccine. Over 62% of the nation has already received 2 doses, and Cuba leads Latin America and the world with the highest vaccination rate. So pretty amazing. Um, I think something like this population of like 8 million, over 6 million have been fully vaccinated. So and not only did they do that, they did that under sanctions. Um, so it's amazing feat. Did that under sanctions with the poor economy. Um, you know, Despite all these difficulties. Any comments on that, Carlos?
No, just to say, it's awesome news, and always Cuba for us as Latin Americans and as Latin American socialists, Cuba is always an inspiration, and yeah, always leading the way in Latin America and the world. Actually, as you said, like I think they're one of the nations in the world with most vaccinated people. So
Hmm.
great
So
example for everyone.
right. And so moving on to another country, we don't really talk about this nation too much, and so I wanted to bring it up, put it in the news headline because they had something interesting happened in Barbados. They elected their first head of state. Her name is Sandra Moss. She will be the first president elect in Barbados, and more specifically, she's going to be replacing the former head of state, which has been the Queen of England since Barbados has been a colony. And it's mostly a symbolic position, but still, this is important. Many people in Barbados, including the new president herself, emphasize that this new move would mark a shift from their colonial past, which is, again, pretty amazing that they've recognized the Queen of England for that long. The woman who's going to be the new president, Sandra Moss, is pretty impressive. She was born in Barbados. She studied at the University of West Indies, went on to went on to become a lawyer, and then was an ambassador and then a judge. So interesting story. Uh, any thoughts on that? Any quick thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's awesome, and well, I don't know her politics. I'm not sure how how much change she can she and her administration can put into effect in Barbados. But it's a great step in terms of sovereignty.
Hmm.
To a step to decolonize and hopefully allow the people of Barbados to practice actual democracy and hopefully somebody quite radical and um, a movement or you know a
Right,
people's movement comes to power that's quite radical and joins the rest of the progressive forces in the region.
right. And I don't know too much about her politics either, but I do know the Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Motley, is fairly progressive.
Yeah.
She's been really good actually on some issues. She's not like a socialist or anything or super radical, but she's one of the more progressive, especially in for the Caribbean leaders out there. But again, that was just a quick story I thought was really interesting. Moving on to Puerto Rico now. So Puerto Rico, two interesting stories, and real quick because I see we're at the 1 hour 10 minute. But real quick, first one: police are on strike over their pension plans in Puerto Rico. Recently, the police have been used to crack down on protesters against who've been protesting against Luma and the tourism industry. But now the police have refused to work until they can get better pension plans. That's the first one out of Puerto Rico. The second story has also to do with pensions and a recent bill that Governor Pierluisi has signed. This was basically a controversial, like a debt. They called it a debt restructuring bill. What it really was it said we're going to cut all of these programs, including pensions, by 8.5%, cutting public spending to the University of Puerto Rico, cutting public spending on healthcare, and we're going to save that money and try to pay off our debts with it. So in other words, pay off these vulture funds in the United States. Um, and people have been basically up in arms against it. People in Puerto Rico are protesting wildly. Students in the UPR have been protesting because entire universities, entire campus locations in Puerto Rico are being threatened to shut down. Um, it's pretty amazing. There was a thing we talked about this on an old program a while back, but there's less students in Puerto Rico in the University of Puerto Rico now than there were in the 60s and 70s. Just to show you how far it's sort of declined from austerity cuts and all that. So that's what's going on right now. Any thoughts on that or any of those stories, Carlos?
Yeah, Puerto Rico for us is it's sad. I think we always have the comparison of Cuba and Puerto Rico. The two ways you can go,
Right.
and unfortunately, Puerto Rico still under the thumb of the U.S., still colonized by the U.S., and it shows. And it shows the conditions that people live in compared to Cuba. Um, the fact that people aren't allowed or aren't able to practice political freedom and so on. So all our solidarity with Puerto Rico, us as anti-conquista, very recently during the protest, not too long ago, we've sent some money. Well, actually, we've given money to NY, what they called, Nick? NY Puerto Rico Resistance?
And NY Boricua Resistance.
NY Boricua Resistance. We've given them money that they're going to be using, or they have been using for these protests that have been happening recently. And yeah, hopefully we can continue to do that because Puerto Rico, especially for us as a diaspora, and especially for the diaspora in the U.S., Puerto Rico is obviously a front line for us. So yeah, hopefully we can keep doing it.
Right. So moving on from we have another quick story, real quick on Haiti. I'll do this one real quick. Two things. So one, the U.S. missionaries that were basically kidnapped, maybe a week or 2 weeks ago. They're still being held in Haiti, and they're now being held for ransom. Um, and the other thing is this: so right now in Haiti, there's been a fuel shortage, which has caused local hospitals to close, or has threatened local hospitals to close. Much of the fuel in Haiti is being controlled by gangs who have cut off access to the fuel to certain institutions like hospitals, schools, administrative buildings, etc. Some of these gangs have been saying that they are opposed to the current prime minister, uh, who's in charge, Ariel Henry.
Hmm. Yeah,
So yeah.
and that guy wasn't even elected either, was he?
Mm,
Um,
I
I think he
think
took over.
I
Did he
think he
take over from?
yeah, I think he was the one that was elected. He was so it was someone else took over the prime minister spot, and the guy who's currently prime minister was elected first. someone else took over, and then that guy stepped aside and then let this guy assume
Okay.
his prime minister election or whatever. But at the end of the
Okay.
day, they're all elites um, fighting over Haiti, fighting over the whatever imperialist spoils of Haiti that there is. If anyone wants to know more about Haiti, I would recommend check out the Haiti Info Project and the work that they do. Um, really crucial, especially seeing what's going on recently, what's going to be happening soon in Haiti, with all of this sort of chaos with the gangs and such. Moving on to South America, though, I'll start with Colombia. So, a couple interesting things in Colombia. First, Duque announces the arrest of a notorious cartel leader in Colombia, Dairo Antonio Usuga, who was arrested last Saturday. He was the leader of the Clan del Golfo. Duque compared the arrest as being as important as the arrest of Pablo Escobar in the 90s. Um, and yeah, so any thoughts on that, Carlos?
It's a front. It's a
Right.
front really, because if you see, even if you see the images of the guy being arrested and the videos and the pictures, the guy's, he's totally chilled, relaxed. In fact, in some of them he's smiling. I think some of the policemen were like taking selfies with him. um, and because he knows, so basically what they're saying in Colombia, why this happened was there's some kind of deal to extradite him to the U.S. He will take, he'll plead guilty for some charges and take some time, but his wealth won't be touched, and he can come back to Colombia whenever, after some time he'll come back to Colombia and he'll be fine. Um, and so what that does is it gives Ivan Duque, the president of Colombia, right now where his ratings were like super low,
Right.
um, with the elections coming up soon next year, they needed something, something quite big to try and change that, and this was their way, and it was effective because now in the polls he's beginning to climb a little bit. People think that he's done this amazing thing, and that's what they painted it like. The first time since Pablo Escobar that we've got this huge um drug dealer.
You
Yeah, I
know,
don't buy it.
right. You're right. What's interesting too is this was a CNN article. So as I'm reading it, I don't know anything about this guy. I never heard of him until this arrest. But the way they described him in the CNN article, they say, well, he used to dabble. He used to be a left wing insurgent in his past, and during that time he got involved with drug trafficking and the drug trade. So it's just like they they throw all these little subtle things in there to make it seem like, well, all these left wing insurgents in Colombia are just drug cartel leaders or whatever. It's ridiculous. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, yeah, that makes sense to me. So moving on, two more stories. So in Colombia, the
Oh,
ELN.
wait. Can I also just
Yeah,
point out that, also thinking about Simon Trinidad, who was tried supposedly for drug trafficking. They were trying to give him maximum everything for drug trafficking, even though they have no evidence. This guy, who they have all the evidence for, well, we don't know for how long he's going to be sentenced for, but we can bet that he's going to be doing maybe 5, maybe 10 years. Whereas somebody like Simon Trinidad, no evidence, and the guy is sitting rotting in jail for 60 years. And we know that because in the past we know that like big drug dealers, traders from Colombia have been extradited. They've pleaded guilty, and I think they do some kind of deal where they'll give up some kind of information, and then they'll let them go, and like
yeah,
they'll give them a reduced sentence. So what I'm trying to say is, where the real criminals, when it comes to real criminals, they'll be pardoned, they'll be given to a few years. When it comes to revolutionary leaders, you know, the full force of the imperialists.
right. And
Uh,
then this guy's actually like a big kingpin, like a drug kingpin,
right,
and so the amount
right,
of crimes that he's associated with and tied back to probably, you probably couldn't even name them all. Um,
right.
So yeah, it is pretty. That's a good point to make. That it's extremely unfair in this sort of justice system. But the next story I have on Colombia is it's really about China and Colombia. It's pretty interesting. China and Colombia are growing closer together. Trade between the two nations has increased significantly within the last decade. Colombian exports to China have gone up by sevenfold in the last decade. In addition, almost 25% of Colombia's imports are from China. Colombia has also recently received a large sum of Sinovac, the Chinese COVID vaccine. And on top of this, China invested $6 billion in the first metro line in Bogota, and U.S. influence over Colombian politics and economics still far outweighs China. But in the last decade, there's been a rapid shift in Chinese imports and investment, which is threatening that relationship. Any thoughts on that? I thought that was interesting. This is something that keeps coming up, sort of U.S. China competition within the United States' backyard, right here in Latin America, and or what the U.S. calls its backyard. And it's interesting because this I think is frightening many U.S. imperialists, many U.S. foreign policy makers who see Latin America as being like the most secure spot for U.S. interest.
Yeah, right. And we it's a shame that Colombia. So we again, like, just as we support our own progressive governments, we always say we give them critical support. We we don't give them unconditional support because we know there's some things that still need to be worked on. We support Venezuela, particularly their national sovereignty. The Venezuelan people should be allowed to practice their political freedom without interference from the outside, without particularly uh, without the interference of imperialists, U.S. imperialists and U.S. imperialists who are backing right and extreme right sections of society. So it's a shame that, and so I say that to say, some of the deals that we do with China aren't great either. Particularly when it comes to countries like Colombia, in places like Venezuela, Bolivia, where the government does deal with China, where this is a government that isn't going to allow um, certain things to happen. There's going to be some restrictions, some limitations. I'm not sure of the nature of the relationship between Colombia and China, but all I would say is that it's a shame that we don't have a government in Colombia that that does take care of its people, that puts the interests of our people first, because maybe these deals aren't great for us within in the context that they're happening in with a right wing, an extreme right wing government, and a puppet of the imperialists. So yeah, you know, hopefully in the future, in the near future, next year, it looks likely that we will have at least a left leaning leader, and 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 yeah, hopefully these deals can perhaps be better for our people as they currently stand. As they currently stand, I don't see, how it would benefit the Colombian people really.
Right. And that's something interesting that we got probably should take more time to start talking about the upcoming Colombian elections. Because I feel like
Right.
just like in Brazil, those are be just as important for not only for Colombians but also for all of Latin America. Um, so now going on to moving on to Brazil, a new study shows that murders against indigenous people in Brazil increased by 61% last year. Here's a quote from the article. There were 182 murders of indigenous people in 2020 compared to 113 murders in 2019, a 61% surge. There were 263 reported land invasions, an alarming increase of 137% over incursions on indigenous territory the previous year. The article blames the government of Brazil for encouraging more land invasion as well as not doing enough to protect indigenous communities. Bolsonaro, for his part, has praised the U.S. Army General George Custer, and he praises him for clearing the prairies of indigenous folks and has criticized indigenous communities and reservations for being on valuable land. Just to give you an idea of how sick how sick in their head this individual is. But any thoughts on that, Carlos?
No, my only thoughts is that he's a piece of shit.
Yeah, yeah, and I still think back to his what was that thing he said for the election? He's either going to be reelected, arrested, or killed. And there's only one of those that I really hope for. But he can't advocate for that here on YouTube at least. But moving on to Peru. Well, actually, before we get to Peru, let me do this one on Venezuela because I think it relates a lot back to what we talked about with Cuba. So Venezuela, the documents have shown that the U.S. used social media to intervene in local Venezuelan politics. Quote, beginning in October 2013, the NED, a government agency created by the Reagan
Mhm.
administration, provided nearly
The camera.
$300,000 for the National Democratic Institute for a program titled Venezuela: Improve Training and Communication Skills for Political Activists. The NDI was also founded under the Reagan administration as the international arm of the Democratic Party, alongside its GOP counterpart, the International Republican Institute. Both groups often work alongside one another and support many of the same actors and objectives abroad. So basically, the article talks about how certain social media sites like Facebook and Instagram were used by the United States and by different NGOs, NGOs being funded by the NED and the NDI, to essentially foment unrest within Venezuela, very similar to what we saw in Cuba. And this has been going on since 2013. So really, since Chavez was around. Um, and the article specifically it contrasts U.S. meddling in Venezuela using these social media sites with what Americans have been complaining about for the past 4 years, which is Russian meddling in the U.S., which is not nearly to the same degree as what we do in other countries. So, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, and you have the more blatant ways that they do it, funneling money into right wing groups and so on, and then going back to the humanitarians. I
Right.
hate them. They I have beef with them. Those are the ones that again, like, and with Venezuela, it's so clear to see how they use academics. Sorry, my daughter's here. she's she's here listening to our politics. She's a little Marxist, a little communist. Um, but yeah, it's exactly what they do, and they use intellectuals, as you were saying, Nick, intellectuals, professors, academics, liberals who are going to be trusted both in Venezuela and outside of Venezuela.
Exactly.
They look like legit voices. People like Wola, they have a guy, Jeff Ramsey, who's the director for Venezuela for Wola, and they also have a professor who I forget who works with them very closely with them. I think he is part of Wola too. And so these are two respected voices on Venezuela who I don't know if they have direct links to right wing groups, but they certainly use their data. Um, they prop them up. They'll use data that's conjured up by these right wing extreme right groups to come up with their own reports to try and sway the influence, right wing influence, particularly in the West, so that these governments can um, justify their sanctions and whatever other actions and policies they'll use against Venezuela. So it's not just that the direct funding of extreme right wing groups, which they do, or I don't know, like what they do at the Venezuelan Colombian border, where
Right.
um, there's even incursions, invasions, were attempts at military invasions and so on. But also, the soft war,
Mhm.
the so-called soft imperialism, which we have to kind of look out for too.
Right. Exactly. And now moving on to our last story. This one is based in Peru. So protests. There's recently been a lot of protests at copper mines in Peru. Peruvians have blocked road access to copper mines in rural areas. They claim that the mining companies have not honored their commitments. The massive wealth that's being collected by the companies has not been seen in the communities and where the resources have been found. These are mostly rural, indigenous communities, and a lot of these mines are owned by, again, we're looking at Australian companies who own these mines. So it's Western imperialist corporations that are owning these corporations who that own these corporations in the global South, which are not only destroying the environment but are also impoverishing local communities. Um, this time in Peru, though. So, any thoughts on that, Carlos?
Yeah. I mean, also to say, like, Castillo, who just came into power, you would think, and you'd think, and we still hope that he's able to at least, can you stop doing that? It distracted me. You'd hope that that you can at least um, restrict them a little. Um, so yeah, hopefully we'll start to see more of that as Castillo's administration goes on. But at the moment, and also to say that that's what we always say, Venezuela is socialist leaning. In Venezuela, perhaps not foreign companies so much anymore, but local capitalists still have a lot of power. Venezuela is still a mixed economy. These are things that we do need to understand. Like, even though there's a socialist leaning government in power, um, they they have not yet achieved socialism in terms of the people themselves being in full control of the economy. Uh,
Right.
and so if that's in Venezuela that has had uh more than 20 years, or is it 20 years, around 20 years of a socialist leaning government, then what can we expect from a few months of Castillo, which at this moment in time we don't even know how radical his administration is actually going to be.
Right. And I think,
You know.
yeah, and I think I'm glad you mentioned Castillo. One of the article talks about a lot of these protests against a lot of these mines have started, really became popular, became more noticeable when Castillo was elected president. So it was, people saw the more progressive president get elected and took advantage of the moment to really try to, you know, make their voices heard. And it's interesting that you mentioned Castillo. We talked about, I didn't put this on the document, but we talked about this in our own private chat, that one of the things he did recently was what was it? He removed he appointed a foreign minister to Venezuela
Oh
to
yeah.
reignite the Peruvian Venezuelan relations, which have been kind of dead since Chavez was elected. Um, and so he appoints this ambassador, and then very quickly, I think something where the courts found that they tried to charge this ambassador with some sort of crime, and so he rescinded his appointment, and he's going to choose someone else who's most likely probably not going to be too friendly with Venezuela. Um,
Right.
and I think we've done a pretty good job with covering Peru and Castillo. We didn't, because we never put we were very honest. We never put too much faith in the, like, we're not saying that he's a communist or a socialist or anything like that. He's a social democrat. He's a liberal, but he had, like we've said before, he has the potential to open up space for much more radical politics and much more radical movements. And some of his original ideas were very popular with the people: rewriting the Constitution, land reform, focusing on dealing with COVID and the economy. These are all things that Peruvians voted. This is why they voted for him. Um, and so,
So,
I think the way we've covered Castillo has been pretty good, and it's been pretty honest and fair. But what any last thoughts, Carlos, on that, um, on Peru, or on anything else regarding Latin America, or even the first topic we talked about with the political prisoners and such?
this little girl here is trying to play games. Um, in terms of Castillo, I would say that I think I think we were more hopeful before. Of course, to begin with, and considering that his rhetoric during the elections, and considering the fact that he comes from quite a radical party, we were quite hopeful. But at the same time, we were being realists, and I think that's, we had a point, and we're starting to see that we had a point. It's going to be restricted, both in terms of the fact, both because he is, I don't think he's like a revolutionary Marxist, but also even more importantly because the he doesn't have full control of the government
Right.
or the state,
Yeah.
and he was always going to get blocked. The appointment of the Venezuelan of the ambassador to Venezuela, in my opinion, I know in our group chat we had a bit of a debate on this, and I think we disagreed somewhat. In my opinion, I don't think that particular aspect of it can be pinned on him. Um, but because he's basically being blocked, what other choice does he have? But to he's gonna have to choose somebody else to appoint as ambassador to Venezuela. Um, but yeah, we're starting to see what we had said, that he isn't. We can't expect radical change from him for different reasons,
Mhm.
and it's unfortunate, but it's the reality.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And that's really all we had for our headlines part of the show. That's what we had for most of the show. Um, Again, going back to I think the first topic that we discussed with around Alex Saab, please keep paying attention to the Alex Saab campaign. There's going to be a lot more solidarity movements, petitions, rallies, anything in your area. Look for, pay attention to, because it's going to be. I think it's going to be a big case. I don't think it's going to be uh, like a. Again, I can't see them actually finding him guilty, but I could be wrong because again, the way that
They'll find a way.
yeah,
They'll
that's
find a
right.
way to.
the they'll make a way because the evidence just isn't there. But and I think that because of that, it needs to have as much attention as possible. But also to keep in mind that it's not only about Alex Saab, also about Simon Trinidad, about other political prisoners that we have in Latin America who are uh, not. I don't even want to say just as at radical, but more radical, um, more politically clear with what they actually believe in, who are still locked away in prison, given death sentences essentially, and who are not getting the representation or the attention that they deserve to be they deserve due to all the work. I would just say due to the work that they put into the movement itself, right? Um, so look out, pay attention to Alex Saab. Also pay attention to Simon Trinidad. Also pay attention to other FARC members who are being arrested in Colombia and in the U.S. Also pay attention to indigenous leaders, Black leaders, Puerto Rican leaders, all these individuals who are political prisoners within the United States. Um, any last comments, Carlos, and then we'll close it out.
Just an emphasis on Simon Trinidad. We said let's pay attention to all of them, but particularly Simon Trinidad. I think we need to show support for this man. I believe he's 72 years old. He's on a 60-year sentence, and as you said, Nick, that's a death sentence. This is a guy that could die. He's already 72 years old. He's at most he's probably got like a decade or two to live. It's so urgent to for him, but also symbolically for us as um, for us who might consider ourselves revolutionary Latin Americans. It's so important for us to fight for people like Simon Trinidad.
Hmm.
Um,
And
we can't let this guy just rot in prison. Is
and I'm glad you mentioned his age at the end here because it reminds me too of H. Rat Brown or
yeah.
Imam Jamil Alamin, a former Black Panther, former also I think believe BLA member, who was arrested in the United States. He's been in prison for decades now. Um, Recently got out. He's very old. I forget his exact age, but basically he has many terminal illnesses, and so they let him out. With maybe a month or so left to live. Um, Dealing with all kinds of diseases and infections and et cetera, et cetera. Uh, so it's extremely, it's extremely. This is one of the things that they do to our political prisoners, which is that they intentionally, put them in conditions where they're going to die, where they're going to be extremely sick or extremely ill, and then at the very last minute they'll let them out, only for them to have a few whatever weeks, days left.
Right.
So, it really is a death sentence. But thanks
Right.
everyone for joining us. Thanks for sticking with us for the hour and 40 minutes. This was important talk. This is important also campaign that's going to keep going on probably for the next few weeks, if not months. So please pay attention to it. Please support us. Hit the like button. Share the video with anyone you know. We always get a lot of people reaching out to us saying that they shared this with their mom or their parents or their grandparents and that they enjoyed it. So we always like hearing that. So please keep sharing and support us on Patreon and PayPal too if you want to help support the resistance back home. And have a good weekend, everyone. Enjoy your Sunday. Bye.
See you, comrades.